If someone had told me 10 years ago that Police Captain Marcus Thorne would one day be asleep on my couch, I would have laughed. Not a kind laugh, but the brittle, sharp kind that hides a deep and painful ache. Because for 10 years, Marcus Thorne was not a man, not really. He was a landmark, a monument carved from granite and authority, standing tall in the center of our small town's universe. A universe I only ever observed from the quietest, most distant orbit. My life was built on silence and order. I was the town archivist, a keeper of faded photographs and brittle documents, a custodian of memories that weren't my own. My cabin, tucked away at the end of a long gravel road, was my fortress. Its silence was a thick, comfortable blanket. My books were my soldiers, standing in perfect, alphabetized ranks on their shelves. Routine was my religion. Coffee at 6, work at 8, home at 5, a quiet dinner, a book, and then sleep. A life measured not in moments, but in the predictable, metronomic tick of a clock. And then there was Thorne. I saw him mostly from a distance. Through the large plate glass window of the library, I'd watch his cruiser glide down Main Street. He had a way of moving that was utterly economical, no wasted gestures. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a physical fact that seemed to bend the air around him. When he walked into the diner for his morning coffee, the low hum of conversation would dip for a second, a subconscious acknowledgement of his presence. He was authority personified. He was also, for as long as I'd known, married. Sarah Thorne was as much a town fixture as he was, head of the Historical Society, organizer of the annual Founders' Day picnic. They were the town's royal couple. Perfect, unassailable. And for me, that fact was the final, insurmountable wall around the fortress that was Marcus Thorne. It made my secret, stupid fascination with him safe. He was an impossible idea, a character in a book I could read, but never enter. So I watched, and I cataloged the details of him the way I cataloged historical records. The way his dark hair curled just over the collar of his uniform. The deep timbre of his voice when he occasionally had to give a statement to the local paper. The small, almost invisible scar that cut through his left eyebrow. A tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect marble. These observations were my private collection, stored away in a dusty archive in my chest, never to be seen or spoken of. They were harmless. They had to be. My solitude was a carefully constructed thing, and a feeling like the one I had for Marcus Thorne was a wrecking ball. The wrecking ball arrived on a Tuesday. It started as a rumor, a whisper that traveled faster than the afternoon storm clouds gathering over the mountains. A fight, a public one, outside the grocery store. Shouting. Sarah's car peeling out of the parking lot. By the time I left the library for the day, the rumor had solidified into fact. The Thornes had separated. The town's perfect monument had a crack running right down the middle. I told myself it meant nothing. It was gossip, a sad turn of events for two people I barely knew. I drove home under a bruised purple sky, the first drops of rain splattering against my windshield. I made my dinner. I sat with my book. I tried to immerse myself in the history of 19th century agricultural practices. But the words were just black marks on a page. The silence in my cabin was different tonight. It wasn't peaceful. It was listening, waiting. The storm broke just after 9. A sudden, violent deluge that hammered against the roof and sent rivers of water streaming down the windows. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the cabin into a deep, velvety darkness, broken only by the frantic strobing of lightning outside. I lit a few candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. The familiar space felt alien, transformed by the storm. It was the headlights that startled me most. Two sharp beams of white light, cutting through the curtain of rain, sweeping across my living room as a vehicle turned into my long, unpaved driveway. No one ever came out here, especially not at night, especially not in a storm like this. My heart became a frantic, trapped bird, beating against the cage of my ribs. I stood frozen in the center of the room, watching the lights get closer, closer, until they stopped. A truck door slammed, a heavy, solid sound muffled by the roar of the rain. Footsteps, heavy and certain, on the wooden porch steps. Then a knock. 3 hard, authoritative raps that seemed to shake the entire cabin. I moved slowly, my body feeling disconnected from my brain. I opened the door a crack, peering out into the maelstrom. And there he was, Marcus Thorne, not Captain Thorne of the immaculate uniform and polished boots. This was a man stripped of his armor. He was soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his plain gray t-shirt clinging to his chest. He looked lost. The granite had crumbled, and in its place was just a man standing in the rain. "Elias," he said. His voice was rough, tired. He'd never called me by my first name before. It was always a formal, distant Mr. Jensen Captain Thorne. I managed my own voice a stranger in my ears. He didn't seem to notice my shock. He just looked past me, into the warm, candlelit space of my home. "I know this is strange. I was just driving. My truck, it just sort of ended up here." He ran a hand through his wet hair, water dripping from his fingertips. "Look, I need a place to clear my head. For a night. If it's too much to ask, I'll go." My mind was a blank slate. Every coherent thought had been washed away by the storm and the impossible reality of him standing on my porch. All my carefully constructed walls, my routines, my silent observations from a safe distance, they were all gone. He was here. He was asking for shelter. And there was only one possible answer. "No," I heard myself say. "It's not too much. Come in. You're soaked." He stepped inside, and the entire cabin seemed to shrink. He was bigger in here, in my small, quiet world. He brought the storm in with him, the smell of rain and damp earth, and something else, something uniquely him, a scent of ozone and weariness. He stood dripping on the small rug by the door, his presence a massive, disruptive force in the ordered stillness of my life. "Thank you," he said, his eyes scanning the room, the shelves of books, the simple furniture. He looked like a man who had just washed ashore on a strange island. "Let me get you a towel," I said, the simple, practical words a lifeline in a sea of utter confusion. I moved towards the small linen closet, my legs feeling unsteady. My world had been upended by 3 knocks on the door. The monument had walked off its pedestal and into my living room. I had no idea what to do with him. I handed him a thick, dry towel. He took it, his large, calloused fingers brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, a ghost of a touch, but a bolt of lightning, far more potent than the ones outside, shot up my arm, straight into my chest, and set that frantic bird to battering its cage again. I pulled my hand back as if I'd touched a hot stove. My breath caught in my throat. Did he feel that? He must have felt that. He knows. My mind screamed the panicked, irrational thought. But he just scrubbed the towel over his hair, oblivious. Or pretending to be. His face was grim, etched with lines of exhaustion I'd never been close enough to see before. The invincible Captain Thorne looked breakable. "I can take the couch," he said, his voice still rough. He gestured to the worn, comfortable sofa that faced the stone fireplace. "Of course. I'll get you some blankets. And would you like some tea? Or something stronger?" The offer felt absurd coming from my lips. I didn't keep anything stronger than chamomile. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, tea sounds good. Thanks." While the kettle heated on the gas stove, I watched him from the corner of my eye. He'd taken off his wet t-shirt, revealing a plain white undershirt that did little to hide the powerful musculature of his chest and shoulders. He used the towel to dry his arms, and I saw the intricate lines of a tattoo on his upper bicep, a dark swirl of ink I'd never known was there. Another detail from my secret collection, only this one felt dangerous. Illicit. He wasn't a photograph anymore. He was flesh and blood and trouble, sitting in the heart of my sanctuary. I brought him the tea in my favorite mug, the one with a slight chip on the rim. He took it with both hands, wrapping his fingers around it, as if for warmth, though the cabin was far from cold. He stared into the fireplace, where I had built a small fire to chase away the damp chill. The flickering light played across the sharp angles of his face, making the scar over his eyes seem deeper. The power dynamic was all wrong. Out there, in the world, he was the one in control, the one people looked to for answers. Here, in the quiet candlelight of my home, he was adrift. I was the one who knew where the blankets were, how to work the stove, which floorboards creaked. For the first time, I felt like I was on solid ground while he was the one at sea. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. "It's quiet here," he said, not looking at me. His voice was low, almost a murmur against the backdrop of the storm. "It is," I agreed. "Not just because of the storm. It's always quiet." "Mostly," I said. "It's why I like it," he nodded slowly, taking a sip of the tea. He seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. I sat in the armchair opposite him, a chasm of worn carpet and unspoken tension between us. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the drumming of the rain. It wasn't my comfortable silence anymore. It was his, a heavy, weighted silence, full of things I couldn't begin to guess at. I noticed the way he held the mug, his knuckles white. I saw the faint tremor in his hand. This wasn't just about a fight with his wife. This was something deeper, a fault line running through the foundation of his life. And the tremors were finally reaching the surface. "People think they know me," he said suddenly, his gaze still fixed on the flames. "They see the uniform, the badge. They see the captain. They see Sarah's husband." He paused, and the last two words hung in the air like smoke. "They don't see anything else." I didn't know what to say. This was a confession, a peeling back of a layer I never thought I'd see. I was the town archivist. I was supposed to be invisible. I wasn't supposed to be the keeper of the police captain's existential crisis. "It must be difficult," I offered, the words feeling small and inadequate. He finally looked at me then. His eyes, a startlingly clear, deep blue I'd only ever seen from afar, seemed to be searching for something in my face. "You don't talk much, do you, Elias?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm a librarian," I said, a weak attempt at a joke. "It's part of the job description." A flicker of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Right?" He looked away again, back to the fire. "I think that's why I came here. The quiet. You seem content in it, content." Was that what I was? I had mistaken resignation for contentment for so long. I wasn't sure I knew the difference anymore. My quiet life was safe. It was predictable, but it was also a fortress designed to keep everyone out, and in doing so, it had also kept me in. He finished his tea and set the mug down on the hearth. The sound was unnaturally loud in the still room. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. His broad shoulders slumped, and for a moment, the weight of whatever he was carrying seemed to crush him. I saw the vulnerability then, clear and sharp and painful. The granite had turned to dust. My own carefully constructed defenses were crumbling with his. The archivist, the observer, that part of me was receding, replaced by a raw, aching impulse to reach across the space between us, to put a hand on his shoulder, to offer some kind of comfort. It was an insane, reckless impulse, and I fought it down with everything I had. He stayed like that for a long time. I just sat, watching the firelight on his bent head, my heart a painful, rhythmic thump in the silence. The storm outside began to ease, the rain softening from a roar to a steady, gentle patter. The world was quieting down, but inside my cabin, a new kind of storm was brewing. Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed. "I've made a mess of everything," he said, his voice thick with a sorrow, so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. "You're just a man, Marcus," I said, the name leaving my lips before I could stop it. It felt both impossibly intimate and perfectly natural. "Men make messes." He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his expression, and then something else, something I couldn't read. He stood up, stretching his tired limbs. "I should let you get some sleep." "Sorry for all this, don't be," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The blankets are on the chair." I went to my own small bedroom, closing the door behind me, but I didn't get into bed. I stood in the dark, listening to the sounds of him moving in the other room. The soft thud of a pillow, the rustle of blankets. I heard the couch springs creak as he settled his weight onto them. And then silence. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of images and feelings. Him on my porch, soaked and broken. The accidental brush of our fingers. The raw vulnerability in his eyes. For 10 years, he had been a fixed point in my sky, a distant, untouchable star. Now he was sleeping in the next room. The distance had collapsed to nothing, and the gravitational pull of him was threatening to tear my carefully ordered universe apart. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and listened to the sound of another man's breathing, a sound that would change everything. I woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through my window. For a moment, a blissful, ignorant moment, everything was normal. Then memory came rushing back, a cold, shocking wave. He's here. I slipped out of bed, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a sweater, my hands clumsy. Every move felt momentous, freighted with a new, terrifying significance. I crept to the bedroom door and opened it a crack. He was still asleep on the couch, lying on his side, facing away from me. One arm was tucked under the pillow I'd given him, the other draped over the back of the sofa. The blankets had pulled around his waist, and the back of his white undershirt was rucked up, exposing a strip of skin. In sleep, his face was unguarded, the hard lines softened. He looked younger, almost peaceful. I stood there for a long time, just watching him breathe, the quiet, even rise and fall of his shoulders. This was a dangerous, forbidden kind of intimacy. Watching a man sleep in your home, a man you've wanted from a distance for a decade. It felt like theft. It felt like prayer. I made coffee, moving with painstaking slowness, terrified of waking him. The smell of brewing coffee filled the small cabin, a familiar, comforting scent in a world that had become utterly unfamiliar. I poured 2 mugs, placing one on the small table beside the couch, next to a bottle of aspirin I dug out of the medicine cabinet. A small, inadequate gesture of care. He stirred as I was setting the mug down. His eyes opened, bleary and unfocused at first. He blinked, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the stone fireplace. Then his gaze found me, and a complex series of emotions flickered across his face. Confusion, memory, and something else, shame, regret. "Morning," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Morning," he rasped, pushing himself up into a sitting position. He ran a hand over his face, scrubbing away the last vestiges of sleep. I should get going." The words were a punch to the gut. Of course. He was embarrassed. He'd shown a moment of weakness to the town librarian, and now, in the cold light of day, he wanted to escape, to put the armor back on. "There's coffee," I said, gesturing to the mug. "An aspirin, if you need it." "Thanks," he said, but he didn't reach for it. He was already swinging his legs off the couch, looking for his damp clothes from the night before. "I've imposed enough. It was no imposition," I said, and the sincerity in my own voice surprised me. "You needed a place to stay." He found his shirt and pulled it on, the damp fabric clinging unpleasantly to his skin. He didn't look at me. He was focused on the mechanics of leaving, of erasing his presence from my home. The intimacy of the night before, the shared vulnerability in the candlelight. It was all evaporating like morning mist. I felt a desperate, foolish urge to say something to stop him. "Don't go. Stay. Talk to me." But the words were stuck in my throat, tangled in a decade of silence and fear. He was putting his boots on, lacing them with quick, efficient movements. The captain was reassembling himself before my eyes. "Elias," he said, finally looking up. His face was a mask of polite distance. "I appreciate this. More than you know. I won't forget it." It sounded like a dismissal, a final, polite closing of a door that had been briefly, accidentally, left ajar. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. He turned back, and for a fleeting second, I saw the lost man from the night before peer out from behind the captain's mask. "Take care of yourself," he said, and then he was gone. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to the sound of his truck starting, the crunch of its tires on the gravel driveway as he drove away. The silence he left behind was immense, a cavernous, echoing void. The room still held the faint scent of him, of rain and soap and sleep. The blanket on the couch was still warm from his body. His coffee mug sat untouched on the table, a testament to his hasty retreat. The recoil was brutal, a physical sensation of loss and humiliation. My mind, my cruel, overthinking mind started its vicious work immediately. He regrets it. He was desperate, and you were convenient. A safe, quiet place with no complications. He thinks you're a pathetic fool. The thoughts were a swarm of angry bees in my stomach. I had allowed a crack in my fortress, and now the entire structure felt compromised, ready to collapse. I picked up his mug, his untouched coffee, a cold, bitter symbol of the morning after. I poured it down the sink, the dark liquid swirling away, and with it, the insane, fragile hope that had taken root in the dark. The next 2 days were a special kind of hell. I went back to my routine, but it was a hollow pantomime. The silence of the library, once a comfort, now felt accusatory. The silence of my cabin at night was no longer peaceful solitude. It was the deafening sound of his absence. Every time I looked at the couch, I saw him. Every time the wind rustled the trees outside, I thought it was the sound of his truck on the gravel. My loneliness, which I had worn for years like a familiar, comfortable coat, was suddenly threadbare and cold. He had shown me what it was like to have another presence in my space, another heartbeat in the quiet, and now I was acutely, painfully aware of being alone. I had been content in my orbit, but now I knew what it was to be pulled in by a sun, only to be flung back out into the cold, empty dark. I didn't see him in town. His cruiser was parked outside the station, but he wasn't at the diner. I heard whispers that he was staying at a motel on the highway. That divorce lawyers had been called. The town's gossip mill churned on, but for me, it was all just noise. The only thing that mattered was the crushing, absolute silence from him. He hadn't called. He hadn't come back. I had misread everything. The vulnerability, the shared glances, the quiet intimacy by the fire. It was all a projection of my own pathetic longing. For him, it was a moment of crisis. For me, it had been a moment of revelation. The disparity was a source of deep, burning shame. On the third night, I gave up. I accepted the new reality. It had been a fluke, a storm-driven anomaly. Life would go back to the way it was. I would rebuild my walls thicker and higher this time. I would forget the feel of his fingers brushing mine, the sound of his breathing in the dark. I would force myself to forget. I was washing the dinner dishes, staring out the kitchen window into the encroaching twilight, when the headlights appeared again at the end of the drive. My heart didn't leap. It just stopped, a dead, heavy weight in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, my hands submerged in soapy water, and watched his truck roll to a stop in the exact same spot as before. This time felt different, more terrifying. The first time had been an accident, a twist of fate. This time it was a choice, his choice, and I had no idea what it meant. He got out of the truck and just stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin. He wasn't soaked and desperate this time. He was wearing clean jeans and a dark blue Henley. He looked hesitant, anxious. The confident mask of the captain was gone, and so was the broken look of the man in the storm. This was someone new, someone uncertain. He walked to the porch and stopped, not knocking this time. He just waited. I knew he could see my silhouette in the lighted kitchen window. He was leaving the next move to me. I dried my hands on a towel, my movements slow and deliberate. My mind was a roaring furnace of fear and hope. Don't open the door. Protect yourself. And a quieter, more insistent voice, you have to know. I walked to the door and opened it. We stood there for a long moment, separated by the threshold, the evening air cool between us. "Hi," he said. It was a small, fragile word. "Hi," I replied, my voice equally unsteady. Can we talk?" I stepped back, holding the door open. He entered, and the cabin shrank around him again, but this time it felt different. Not like an invasion, but like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He didn't go to the couch. He stood in the middle of the room, turning to face me. His hands were shoved into his pockets, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, "for how I left the other morning. It was cowardly." I just nodded, unable to form words. "I panicked," he continued, finally lifting his gaze to mine. His blue eyes were raw with an emotion I couldn't name. Everything, all of it, it was too much. I ran. "It's what I do, apparently. You had a lot on your mind," I said, finding my voice at last. "That's not an excuse," he said, shaking his head. "I spent the last 2 days in a sterile motel room, trying to force everything back into the neat little boxes I've lived in my whole life. The cop box, the husband box, the straight man box. He said the last words with a bitter, self-mocking twist to his mouth. None of them fit anymore. Maybe they never did. He took a step closer. The space between us tightened, crackling with unspoken energy. The only thing that felt real in the last week, in the last year, maybe ever, was sitting in this room. With you, my breath hitched. The bees in my stomach were gone, replaced by a flock of hummingbirds, their wings beating a frantic, hopeful rhythm. This is happening. This is real. I didn't misread it. The question was a whisper, a plea. I needed to hear it. He closed the remaining distance between us. So close now, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He slowly, hesitantly, reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumbs stroking gently along my cheekbone. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, unadulterated feeling that traveled through every nerve in my body. "No, Elias," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't misread anything." And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was nothing like I had ever imagined. My fantasies had always been desperate, hungry things. This was different. It was slow. It was questioning. His lips were soft, tentative against mine, asking a question I had been waiting my entire life to answer. I leaned into him, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath my palms. It was a kiss of confession, a kiss of apology, a kiss that spoke of years of loneliness and lifetimes of being misunderstood. It wasn't about passion, not yet. It was about recognition. Two solitary souls finding a quiet harbor in a storm. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing heavily. The silence that followed was the most profound I had ever known. It was a silence not of absence, but of complete, overwhelming presence. "I'm scared," he murmured against my skin. "Me too," I breathed back. And it was the truest thing I had ever said. He pulled back slightly, his hands moving to grip my shoulders, as if to steady himself. "I have a bag in my truck," he said, a faint, nervous smile playing on his lips. I was hoping. I don't want to clear my head anymore. I just want to be here. It was a symbolic gesture more powerful than a key or a public declaration. He wasn't running from his old life anymore. He was choosing to walk toward a new one. Toward me. "Bring it in," I said, and my own smile, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes, felt like a sunrise after a long, dark night. The days that followed were a study in quiet discovery. We moved around each other in the small cabin, a slow, careful dance of learning another person's rhythms. The first morning, waking up and seeing him there, really there, asleep in my bed beside me, was a shock to the system. The anxiety was still a faint hum beneath the surface, a fear that I would blink and he would be gone, that this was all an elaborate dream. But he wasn't gone. He was there, his breathing a steady, reassuring presence in the dark. He was there when I made coffee, his large frame filling my small kitchen, our elbows bumping as we reached for the sugar. He was there in the evenings, sitting in the armchair reading one of my books, his brow furrowed in concentration. We talked. We talked for hours, filling the quiet spaces with the stories of our lives. He told me about the suffocating pressure of his father's expectations, the path he felt forced onto. He spoke of his marriage to Sarah not with anger, but with a deep, weary sadness. A partnership born of friendship and societal expectation, a comfortable arrangement that had slowly starved them both of something vital. He confessed that he'd noticed me for years, the quiet man in the library, and it felt a strange, inexplicable pull he'd never allowed himself to examine. I, in turn, told him about my own fortress of solitude, about the fear that had kept me locked away, observing life through glass windows. I admitted the depth of my long-held fascination with him, the confession leaving my lips feeling clumsy and terrifying, but he just listened, his expression gentle, understanding. He didn't laugh. He didn't pity me. He just reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, a simple, solid anchor. We created a new kind of domesticity, a language of small gestures. The way he would leave a cup of tea on my desk, when I was working. The way I learned to fold his shirts the way he liked. The comfortable silences that fell between us were no longer empty, but full of a shared understanding. The cabin, once my solitary fortress, transformed. It became a home. Our home. One afternoon, he was on the phone in the other room, his voice low and serious. It was his lawyer. The legal machinery of his old life was grinding on. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. This was real. There were consequences. The town was watching. When he came back into the living room, he looked tired but resolute. He sat down on the couch next to me and pulled me against his side, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. "It's going to be messy for a while," he said, staring into the cold fireplace. "We knew it would be," I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. It felt like the most natural place in the world. People will talk. They'll stare. Some of them won't understand. Let them, I said, a new, unfamiliar bravery blooming in my chest. I've spent my whole life being invisible. Maybe it's time to be seen. He turned his head and kissed my temple. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "We deserve to be happy," I corrected him gently. "We've both waited long enough." Life was no longer a predictable metronomic tick. It was a symphony of new sounds and sensations. The weight of his arm around me at night. The sound of his laughter, a rich, deep sound I'd never heard before. The taste of the dinners we cooked together, often clumsily, in my tiny kitchen. My world, once so small and gray, had exploded into vibrant, terrifying, beautiful color. I look back on the man I was, the quiet archivist in his fortress of solitude, and I barely recognize him. I thought my routine was peace. I thought my silence was contentment. I was wrong. It was hibernation, a long, lonely sleep I was terrified to wake from. Marcus Thorne was the disruption I never knew I needed. He was the storm that broke down the door and let the world in. He didn't just clear his head in my small cabin. He cleared a space in my life I didn't know was empty. He filled the silence with his presence, with his doubts and his fears, and eventually with his love. This morning, I woke to the smell of coffee already brewing. I found him in the kitchen, bathed in the soft morning light, looking out the window at the trees. He turned as I entered, and a slow, easy smile spread across his face. It was a smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the last of the shadows. He held out a mug for me, our fingers brushing as I took it. The touch no longer sent a jolt of panic through me. It sent a current of warmth, of rightness, of home. My life is no longer a collection of dusty records and silent observations. It's a living document, a story being written every day in shared glances, quiet conversations, and a steady, reassuring presence of the man who came to my door in the middle of a storm, looking for a place to rest, and ended up finding his way home. And in doing so, he showed me the way to my own.